Hey everyone, welcome to the Redefining Work podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today I'm joined by the founder and CEO of MasterClass, David Rogier. And we're going to talk about learning, we're going to talk about content, we're going to talk about video, and a lot more. So this is a conversation I'm really excited to have. And David, thanks so much for making time to join the podcast. I'd love to have you open with an introduction for the audience.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here. I'm David. I'm the CEO and founder of MasterClass. I'm somebody who's gotten in trouble at school because I asked a lot of questions and I probably didn't deal great with authority, but I was also somebody who always loved to learn. And I think that was a big impetus behind MasterClass.
Yeah, well, let's dig into that a bit more. Like, walk me through kind of the origin story and inception of MasterClass. How did the company come to be?
It's a bit of a crazy story. I was working in venture capital, and to be honest, I didn't love it. I don't think I was that good at it. And I went to my boss and I said, "Thanks so much. I'm going to go start something." And he said, "What?" I said, "I'm not sure yet." And he's like, "Well, pitch me on something." And so I told him, "Well, I don't know, I'm going to think of some ideas and, I don't know, I got a bunch in my mind. I want to try some." And he's like, "I'm going to invest." And I was like, "What? I don't have an idea or team." And, he invested just under $500,000. And basically, I had to go think of an idea. That was awesome and kind and terrifying. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't have any constraints, right? Almost in every job and work you have constraints. 2, I felt immense pressure of this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and I don't want to mess it up. But then 3, you can't complain about that to anybody because it is an awesome opportunity. You're not getting a hug from anybody about that. So I really thought long and hard, and somebody gave me a really great piece of advice. She said, "Choose something, even if it fails, you would be proud of it," which to me was it was a constraint, right? And sometimes I think having a constraint helps you be more creative. And I thought long and hard about the things I really care about. I did user interviews. I posted on Craigslist asking to talk to people, I was raised in part by my grandmother, who instilled in me that education is the only thing that someone can't take away from you. And that kind of all combined. And I said, hey, if I have one chance, I want to build something that people can't take away from others. And that means education. And then I started thinking, hey, I love to learn. How come I don't like to take online classes? I love to learn. How come I didn't love school? The world is changing at a faster rate than ever has. If I look at my mom and dad, the things that they learned in school would last them for most of their life. That's no longer the case now. If you're out of the cycle for 6 months, the world changes. And it made me really think about, if I designed a school for the rest of your life, what would it look like? And one of the biggest differences compared to the school that we're all forced to go to is you have to want to do it, right? You have to enjoy it. And so said, what if you could combine the worlds of things we love to do and watch, like movies, right? And learn interested in people who have achieved amazing things, and combine that with things that you actually really need to know. And so if you can make it possible for anybody in the world to learn from the best, but in a way that looked as good as an Oscar-winning film. And that was the idea of MasterClass. So we launched with 5 instructors. It was Annie Leibovitz, James Patterson, Dustin Hoffman, Usher, and Serena Williams. That was our first 5, and we launched in May of 2015.
Yeah, I imagine listeners might be familiar with those names. They have a bit of a brand cachet of mastery in their different domains. How do you? I mean, obviously the platform has grown over the last 10 years, and if you look at the roster of instructors, I mean, it is a who's who of people who are at the very pinnacle of their field. And so I'd love to get a sense from you of like, how do you pick instructors? What is the process of kind of identifying? And these are all people who are obviously very much in demand for a range of reasons, and through a range of platforms. And so what's the process of like identifying and recruiting people to join MasterClass as instructors?
I mean, at first it was impossible. I mean, everybody said no to us, right? And then now we probably say no to 9 out of 10 people. We do it based on a combination of factors, but it's research driven. So it's who do people want to learn from? Who is it other masters would want to learn from and respect? We talk to a lot of employers and companies with what skills do they think people need to learn and know. We talk to employees at companies. We look at book sales. We look at social. We do our own proprietary algorithms, and we try to figure out not only, there are obvious people, right, who people want to learn from, right? Barack Obama. I don't need a survey or analytics to tell me people want to learn from Barack Obama. But part of our job is to also bring to you folks that you don't know that you should know. And that we use a lot of math and stats to surface those folks. And then it's to figure out what things do you actually want to learn from that person.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. And I think that the breadth of content and masters you have teaching, I think, again, like it hits, you can see some of the known leaders in different disciplines, as you mentioned, but you can also see people that maybe, I was a customer, and I remember, and forgive me, I'm forgetting his name now, but one of the leading sleep scientists.
His name is Matthew Walker out of Berkeley. His class is awesome. It's really interesting. So, we, launched a product that's designed for enterprises. It's called MasterClass at Work. And not only do they get access to all our classes, but we also make some content in classes that are just for those folks. And we create a bunch of tools that are just for those folks. And the adoption of that has been way faster than I ever imagined. So we already have half of the Fortune 100 as customers. And what surprised us is some of the classes that are most watched are ones that you would expect. The Bob Iger class is really watched. But one of the most watched classes, Lars, from employees is actually Matthew Walker's class on sleep science.
Yeah.
And we had, a large firm approach us being like, hey, we see the number one class that our employees are watching is the sleep science class. Do you think that we have a work-life balance issue? I'm like, yes, you do. But what's so awesome about what that company did was saying, hey, in the past you'd say, hey, how somebody spends their time at home is not our problem, right? That's their problem. But I think what firms and companies are starting to realize is like, no. How somebody sleeps at home, how they feel at home, how their mental health is impacts how that person works. And if we can help them there, not only is it good for the company, but it's also the employee is going to be thankful for it and appreciate that investment and care into themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think that it connects to the broader conversations we have in the new world of work of just, wellness, mental health, well-being. It's a lot more than just the traditional. I think, we used to think about employee support and healthcare in terms of, medical benefits and dental and vision. And
it's much more than that, right?
It's so much more than that. So that's interesting. A lot of our audience are HR leaders and practitioners. And so MasterClass at Work is probably something that they should be on their radar. How does the platform work? You mentioned, obviously having access to the full library of content, but for the kind of tailoring of the content, perhaps playlists or tools that you design specifically for your corporate partners and the companies who subscribe, what does that look like? Can you give me a little more insight into that?
Yeah. So MasterClass at Work, they get access to all classes, right? But what they also get access to are ways that our team works with them to say, hey, what are the most important needs or skills that your company and employees are facing? And how can we create custom paths and playlists that address those? And then, in the future, how they can do it in cohorted groups so they can have groups of their employees to do that. We also provide facilitation guides along with that. And it's really trying to help those companies work on the crucial leadership skills, on the soft skills, and on culture.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said earlier when you were, kind of walking us through the initial concept and thesis for MasterClass and the production value. You kind of mentioned, movie-like experience of learning. And I think that's, if you haven't witnessed any MasterClass content, definitely check that out, and you'll see that that's pretty accurate. From every instructor, every video that I've seen, there's, while the layout, the room, the environment changes, the production aesthetic doesn't, if that makes sense, right? Like the lighting, the arrangement of the room, you can just tell that a lot of care goes into that. And I think especially in an environment where, if you go back to the early days of the pandemic when, much of the conversations we had were, via Zoom or Teams or Google Meet. And, we'd go to webinars and see content, and it was, content, and maybe it was 1080p, but it was, somebody's office. Right. And then you go to a platform like MasterClass, and it's just this immersive cinematic environment where you also have some of the best in class masters kind of teaching their craft. And so I'd love to just spend some time with you and learn more about how you think about the aesthetic, the design, the environment of the spaces that you have your masters teach in.
So I'm going to be honest. Aesthetic for us is like a second order thing. Here's the first order thing that then leads to this aesthetic. The bar for somebody's attention has risen. And so whether we like it or not, any L&D content, any educational content is competing with TikTok. That does not mean that the L&D training that somebody wants is necessarily on there. But when somebody has a choice to watch something, that's what that is a choice the person has to make. So something as compelling as that. So for us, when we want to make our classes as compelling as possible, and so for that, it's using it's using emotion and story and aesthetic. And the aesthetic is not trying, hey, it just has to look good. No. It should be, we want you to, as you mentioned, to be immersed in that person's world. So if you're going to learn from Richard Branson or Bob Iger, it should be in their offices or look like their offices, right? It's a place where you would want to learn from them and be immersed in that person's world. And I remember when we launched, Lars, a lot of investors were like, I don't understand. Are you education? Are you entertainment? And you're like, hold on, that's a false premise. The best education is also entertaining. And so, our hypothesis is if I can make it really compelling that you want to keep watching it, you're going to learn more. And what we're seeing in the results is our engagement rates are really high, right? Much more than a traditional L&D product offering. And then as a result, people are going to engage more and going to learn more.
Yeah. No, I mean, that thesis makes total sense. And again, the just the immersiveness of it, you feel like you're there with the instructor. And again, these are you mentioned, Bob Iger and, Serena Williams and people who, you from afar and you follow their work. But, when you see an athlete performing or you see somebody acting in a film, it's not the same situation. And then when they're actually looking at you and kind of teaching you their craft. And so it's interesting just to kind of hear hear the first order, second order approach that you take.
And even small things like eye contact. So anytime you watch an interview, usually the person isn't making direct eye contact with you. They're slightly looking off camera because there's an interviewer at the other camera, so you're looking at it, and so the camera angle is just off. We have actually used a bunch of tech and practice to figure out a way that we can get eye contact to be straight on with the camera. It's a really small effect, but to your point, it's about that intimacy, like that I'm sitting right across from Kim Scott or from Andrew Newey, right?
Yeah. How do you mentioned, MasterClass at work and some of the clients you have there. How do you use MasterClass internally?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have to, like that's the way we make sure it's good. So examples. We just launched a class with Kim Scott, the author Radical Candor. First of all, the book's awesome. The class I think is even more awesome. And so we just had a couple weeks ago. Our exec team took the class, and we all took it as a group, right? Because we wanted that experience of doing it all together. And we talked about it in discussion, and we then had Kim do a discussion with us. That's one. Another is, we try in our internal training and presentations. The first part is always use MasterClass. So even in ways you don't necessarily expect it. I'm picking on Kim Scott here, but we are about to kick off our 360 feedback process. So how do we train people to give great feedback? We include a chapter from Kim Scott. And I think we really think about it as a leadership platform, as a soft skills platform. What are the soft skills that we're working on, or we need somebody to apply for this part of their work? If it's empathy, if it's innovation, if it's creativity, and incorporate that. So we do it all the time.
Yeah. And do you, I'm curious, does it cross over to your hiring process at all, right? Do you give, whether it may be job descriptions, interview process, like how does that show up there?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we look for in people that join the team is one of the things is we look for people that love to learn. People who love to learn not only ask questions, are curious, interested in the world, so they tend to learn faster, right, and adapt faster. But they also tend to be nicer people, because if you love to learn, you understand that you don't know everything out there, right? And so, but the interview process, I mean, we talk about our classes and we talk about what things they've learned from them and what things they don't. And, I've had an interview where somebody's like, I've never taken MasterClass, I haven't checked it out. Like, that person's not showing that they love to learn, right? So, right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a very important part of our culture. And yeah.
So so many instructors that I know you've learned from directly. Does anything, I'm sure a lot of things you learned that kind of stood out in the moment, but kind of looking back over all the masters you've had, is there, one, and I won't even limit you to one, two, or three things that really just stand out that even today are kind of rattling around in your brain?
Okay, so one is from Sarah Blakely. She's the creator of Spanx, who just sold to Blackstone. In her class, one of the things that she talks about, which is like so fascinating, is every night when she was a kid, her dad would ask the whole family, what's one thing that you failed at today? And because he wanted them to try new things. So it was to celebrate it. And I was like, that's such a fascinating thing. Like, as a kid from a young age, that like you're rewarded, right? Or acknowledged for things that you tried and you failed at. So much of our society and culture and education is about only things that you are good at or things that you have done well. And we really thought, how could we integrate that into not only personal life, but also into work? And so every week we send a note to the whole company of one thing that happened that week at the company that either myself or somebody on the team failed at and what we learned from it. That's like a pretty rare thing, right? Usually like you tend to think it's all the raws, but ends up if you do that,
right.
Yeah, but if you do that, it starts becoming, okay, yeah, we tried that thing. It was a really smart attempt. It did not work. Here's the things we learned from it. And all of a sudden, it doesn't become as a big deal because, the first instinct, people want to hide things they failed at. They don't want to talk about it. Makes them more scared to try anything new that fails. But if you make it as a normal process, then all of a sudden, like, okay, great, next, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah. Look, it comes down to psychological safety, right?
Totally.
I mean, I think having that environment, I remember one of my friends is the lead chaos pilot, which is the best title in HR, I think, at X, Google's Moonshot Factory, or Alphabet's Moonshot Factory. Her name's AJ Thomas, and she kind of framed fail as first attempt in learning. And
love that.
They have a culture, obviously, of 10x moonshot innovation. So they have to kill a lot of projects that are successful, but don't reach the bar that they need to continue investing. And so, I think when you create that environment that normalizes failure, even celebrates it, that creates an environment of psychological safety, then people are just so much more encouraged to take risks and try new things because they know that they're not going to be penalized for it.
100%. And I think, some of the things that we've learned and see in firms and that one is there is a regression in soft skills. So what I mean by that is over the past couple of years, we've been at home and over Zoom, right? So we've gotten worse at empathy, at collaboration. And what that leads to, as you point out, is things like psychological being safe, right? The safety of it. And so we have regressed in those things over the past couple of years, which becomes even more important than to actually really push and hone on those things. Because I'd argue in a hybrid work environment, those things are even more important because you miss a lot of the social cues that you would pick up in person. So you have to work extra hard at those things, right?
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to get your perspective as a CEO. I mean, the conversation around in-office, remote, hybrid, that's obviously something we've been talking about since the pandemic, but it feels like we're in the early stages of a different chapter of that conversation where I think more companies are, being more kind of rigid around bringing people back into office with more frequency, if not, fully. As a CEO, how do you think about that, right? Like you have a workforce, you have to think about what's best for them, what's best for the business. How do you kind of navigate those waters in terms of location of employees?
So I think about things as what things do we need to be a first mover on and what things do you not have to be a first mover on? So I mean by that is certain things there's an advantage to be a first mover and sometimes it's actually bad. So to send people home as the pandemic broke, that was important to be a first mover on. It's about the safety of your employees, right? So you're going to err on the aggressive. So we decided, right, and I decided we're going to err on the aggressive side. So we sent our employees home way early, right? And there's a chance we were wrong and it wouldn't, grow or be as big, but it was unknown, and I'd rather err on the side of safety. Return back to the office, to me, there's less of a pressure need to be first mover. So you have an opportunity to actually learn from folks, to experiment, to test, to your point about it's okay to fail and learn things. So we've been running a bunch of tests and different ways to see what actually feels right for us, right? And I think what becomes clear is there's certain types of work that's really advantageous to work from home. There's also certain types of work that's really advantageous to be in the same room as a person. So hard conversations, way better to do in person, right? You pick up on tons of cue, even like Zoom. I don't know if anybody else ever feels this way or Laura, you feel this way. It feels like the audio, you have to wait till the other person stops talking for you to be heard.
Yeah.
Real conversations, that's not actually how it goes. So I don't mean people interrupt people a lot more, but also you say, oh yes, I agree with you. Like all those small things, which are actually really hard to do over Zoom. So there's just small cues that make difficult conversations much better in person. A brainstorm, a creative discussion, really important to do in person. I think the other thing is that I think, and we see this from our employers, is in person, you also can through osmosis observe behavior, and learn from others. So if you sit next to your boss or near your boss, you see how they interact and engage with people. You see what happens when their boss comes to them. You see when somebody comes and complains to them, and you miss that. And I think, without that, you have to work even harder on leadership and on job training, because you're missing a lot of the osmosis, how people learned how to lead.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I appreciate the kind of window into how you think about that as a CEO. Dream guest instructor, somebody who hasn't been on the platform yet, who maybe you've tried and haven't had success yet, or
somebody
you plan to.
Is somebody alive, or can it be somebody who passed away who I wish we had?
I'm going both. I'm gonna one could be alive, one could be somebody who's no longer with us.
Somebody passed away. I would love to. There's an author named Isaac Asimov, who's a sci-fi writer. Who, I'm not big into sci-fi, but he painted worlds based on psychology, which are like really fascinating. So that would have been really fascinating. Obviously, the Wright brothers on how they decided to jump off a hill or cliff with basically a kite and a bicycle, and that becomes a plane. Love to get in there. In the past, another one, I really wish we had captured Maya Angelou. I would have loved to learn from her. I think she's really amazing. Okay, folks existing. I mean, there's a long list. Barack and Michelle Obama, Oprah, Warren Buffett. Yeah, I mean, tons. Yeah. Those, tons.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see kind of who would be the dream instructor list.
If any of them are listening to this podcast, or if anybody who is listening to the podcast knows them well, love to chat.
That's right. Hey, Barack and Michelle, if you are tuning in, hit me up. I don't have VIP packages, but I'll create one just for you. So let me know. And David, last question for you. If you were to teach a class, what would your masterclass be?
I think I have a long ways to go to be even close. But if I had to teach a class, I think two areas I'm really fascinated by, and I feel like I invest a lot of time trying to learn and process and understand both of how we learn. So something about that. And then two, the journey of entrepreneurship is fascinating. And one of the things I was thinking about recently is that it's so much of life is, and I think I'm trained in this, is to seek approval from others. Everything from the good grades you get, right? Awards you get, your parents, your bosses, right? You're seeking their approval. And entrepreneurship is the rejection of that. Because when you have an idea, everybody's going to tell you that idea sucks. And I remember in the beginning that was so jarring, because you want the idea where everybody's like, that's a great idea. But if everybody tells you it's a great idea, it's already been done and tried before. So by nature, what you want to do is you want to do the idea that everybody says is impossible. So you literally have to decide, I'm going to try to do the impossible, and everybody's going to think it's a horrible idea up until it starts to work. Once it starts to work, everybody says, I told you it was a great idea. But I think there's something from the psychological standpoint of that is so fascinating. And and think about how do you incorporate that and allow for that in other parts of the world and society in your life? Because there's something about doing things that other people don't think is going to work that actually helps us lead to brand new things and to innovation. So I don't know, it'd probably be one of those two topics.
Yeah. Well, David, I really appreciate you making time to join me on the podcast, give us all a window into what you've been building at MasterClass and kind of what's next. So
awesome.
Again,
thank you. It's a pleasure
check it out and check out MasterClass at Work. If you're in HR, it's a tremendous resource. So you definitely want to check that out and see if you can bring that into your learning portfolio.